The darkness beyond the Oort cloud was cold and quiet, a place where even light took its time crossing the void. But that silence shattered when the Kalnari fleet arrived, sleek and silver like a school of predatory fish gliding through a black ocean, drawn here by an odd, flickering signal that seemed both ancient and impossibly human. It was a jazz broadcast, distorted by time, bouncing through space for nearly 1,000 years. And while the Kalnari Empire had encountered many species across the galaxy, none had ever encoded such primitive noise with such mathematically complex patterns, sparking just enough curiosity to send a fleet of scouts into this backwater system called Sol. As they approached the third planet from the Sun, their long-range scans picked up signs of life, industrialization, orbiting satellites, and something else, something big, waiting for them just beyond Earth's gravity. Well, a formation of human warships, massive and silent, coated in armor so thick and jagged it looked like they had been built for siege warfare, not spaceflight, their engines humming low like predators circling. The Kalnari laughed, a high, vibrating tone sent across the void as a transmission, their way of mocking the crude ships before them, and their laughter echoed through the comms for several minutes as they prepared a standard greeting that offered peace, but only under the terms of annexation. The humans replied with a single message, voice calm and cold, belonging to someone called Admiral Juno Callas. You are entering Earth-controlled space. State your intentions or prepare to be removed. And the Kalnari, confused by the threat, from what they assumed to be a lesser species, sent back more laughter, this time broadcasting it publicly across the solar system, confident that their superior technology could handle any resistance. They had faced dozens of species, and none had ever dared speak to them this way, let alone threaten them. But Earth, they would soon learn, was not like other worlds. Human ships began moving, not retreating but shifting into defensive formations with perfect coordination, as if they had drilled for this exact scenario. And then something unexpected happened. The Kalnari light cruiser closest to Mars vanished. No warning, just a flash of light and a silent shockwave as it was torn apart by a kinetic slug moving faster than sound, fired from a railgun platform hidden behind the red planet. Panic flickered through the alien fleet, not because they'd taken a loss, they had numbers and strength, but because their shields had failed completely, offering no protection against such a primitive, brutal weapon that simply punched a hole straight through the ship's hull and out the other side. More human ships decloaked, dark grey and bristling with artillery, shaped more like tanks than spacecraft, and every one of them locked weapons on the Kalnari fleet with chilling precision. Admiral Callas spoke again, no emotion in her voice. This was a warning shot. You have 10 seconds to leave Earth space. After that we assume hostile intent. The Kalnari commander, Lord Vorantek, paused now, no longer amused, trying to understand how these humans had developed such powerful weapons, yet still used chemical engines and physical projectiles. He realized with growing dread that humans had not evolved past war the way other species had. They had embraced it, mastered it, built their entire civilization around it like a fortress, and now they stood before an empire known for conquest, not with fear, but with cold, calculated confidence. Behind the lines of warships, strange energy. Readings began to pulse from Earth's moon and deep in Jupiter's orbit. More railguns, more defense platforms, more proof that this was not a bluff. The Kalnari had come expecting a backwater world, an easy annexation, perhaps even a chance to show mercy. But what they found was a species that had grown strong through struggle, that had turned its nightmares into weapons, and that did not care for posturing or protocol. They came laughing, but now silence settled over their fleet, thick and uneasy, as Lord Vorantek stared at the growing wall of steel and fire before him, wondering if perhaps, just this once, they had picked the wrong planet. Admiral Juno Callas stood at the center of the command deck aboard the ISV Goliath, her eyes calm but sharp as steel as she watched the alien fleet drift just beyond Earth's orbital defense perimeter, silent now after their first humiliating loss. The tension on the bridge was heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. Every officer focused on their stations, waiting for the next move from the Kalnari, who had stopped laughing and now hovered in space like uncertain predators facing unexpected prey that had turned to bare its fangs. And while Earth's ships held position, dozens of railgun platforms and gravity mines armed themselves quietly, hidden behind planetary bodies and asteroids, ready to strike again if needed. Because humans didn't trust easily, and certainly not invaders who mocked them at first sight. Lord Varantek, fuming aboard his flagship Shantor, had not expected this challenge, nor the cold precision with which humanity responded to his fleet's presence, and as he stared at the tactical displays showing enemy ships that looked more like mobile fortresses than elegant vessels, he began to understand that brute force was not a sign of weakness here, but a promise, a warning carved into steel. The Kalnari tried to open formal diplomatic channels, their voices smooth and proud as they offered peaceful integration into the Empire, claiming they would share knowledge and stability if humanity agreed to come under their rule. But when that message reached Admiral Callus, she simply raised an eyebrow and replied, "Your offer sounds a lot like a threat dressed in polite words." And then she sent a complete visual file showing the wreckage of the destroyed Kalnari cruiser drifting near Mars, tumbling slowly, pieces torn open like paper by the kinetic slug that had vaporized half its hull. Varantek clenched his claws, realizing Earth was not impressed by their rank or their history, and for the first time in years, he hesitated. The Kalnari Empire had conquered a dozen systems through diplomacy, backed by intimidation, their sleek energy weapons and fast ships always enough to silence resistance. But here, facing ships named Ironhowl, Bloodwake, and Gravestone, he saw no fear, only the grim patience of a people used to fighting for everything they had. Aboard the Goliath, Callus ordered a second transmission. This one was a detailed scan of Kalnari ships, showing their shield frequencies and structural weaknesses, proving that Earth had already studied them, dissected them, and prepared counters before the aliens even reached orbit. And the message ended with her voice again, "We do not bluff, and we do not kneel." Silence followed, longer this time, and the Kalnari began shifting their fleet slightly, subtle movements meant to look defensive, but the humans noticed everything. Their targeting systems recalibrated instantly, and deep beneath the lunar surface, hidden bunkers prepared drone squadrons that could reach the alien fleet in under 5 minutes if needed. The diplomatic line remained open, but nothing more was said for hours. Both sides locked in a quiet standoff, each waiting to see who would move first and across Earth. People held their breath watching the sky, knowing that this was not just about ships and weapons, but survival, pride, and the terrifying unknown that had finally arrived from the stars. Finally, Lord Varantek spoke again, this time with a colder tone. No laughter in his voice, as he requested a direct meeting with a human representative to avoid further misunderstanding. And though he expected a delay, Callus responded immediately, offering to meet him aboard an orbital platform above Earth under strict protocols. No weapons, 1 aid each, monitored by both AI and human security. Varantek agreed, though inside he burned with resentment. Not used to being treated as anything less than a superior, but something about these humans disturbed him. The way they moved, the way they prepared for war without showing fear, as if they had always known the universe would try to break them. When the two leaders finally met face to face in the sterile chamber aboard Station Argus, the tension was sharp enough to cut steel. Callus wore a simple black uniform, no medals, no decoration, only her rank displayed clearly on her shoulder, while Varantek stood tall in layered robes of shimmering silver, every movement practiced and regal. They exchanged no pleasantries, only purpose, and the conversation began with Vorantek stating that Earth would benefit from unity under a greater empire, that war was not needed, that submission would prevent future destruction. But Callus looked him in the eye and said, "We've been through worse than war." Then detailed Earth's history, centuries of conflict, civil strife, global threats, AI rebellions, and near-extinction events. Each one survived not because of peace, but because humanity had learned to fight smarter, harder, and with an anger that never fully cooled. Vorantek listened, but something shifted in his posture, something uncertain, as if he finally understood that these people were not posturing. They were forged by fire, and their ships weren't crewed by accident. They were designed to win, not to impress. The meeting ended with no agreement, only a final warning from Callus. "Leave now, or the next shot won't be a warning." And as she turned away, Vorantek found himself staring at the viewport, looking down at the blue and green world below, realizing that the people of Earth might not be the Empire's next vassals, but its first true rivals. The silence after the failed meeting did not last long, and as the Kalnari ships began to move again, slow, deliberate, and with strange patterns, humanity's sensors picked up the change at once, alerting every warship and orbital platform to prepare for battle. And across the solar system, Earth's military forces went from high alert to full combat readiness, not because they were afraid, but because they had learned never to wait for the second shot. The first strike had been a warning, but now it was clear the Kalnari were planning something else, something bigger, and though they hadn't fired a weapon yet, their fleet formations, the sudden data disruptions and faint energy spikes all told the same story. An attack was coming, and it would be sharp, fast, and meant to cripple Earth's defenses before a proper response could be made. But humanity was not like the other species the Kalnari had conquered, and long before the first beam was fired, Admiral Juno Callus was already coordinating counterattacks with captains spread across 100 ships, from the Martian defense line to the Moon's shadow network. When the first energy blasts lit up space like a false sunrise, they didn't hit human ships directly. Instead, they aimed for communication nodes, relay satellites, and power relays, trying to blind Earth's forces before the main fleet pushed forward. But the Kalnari didn't know that Earth had prepared for blind war centuries ago, that they trained to fight even when signals were jammed, when visuals were down, and when chaos was at its worst. So, within moments, dozens of AI-guided defense drones launched from hidden silos near Saturn and Neptune, while railguns hidden in Jupiter's moons spun up and targeted the lead Kalnari vessels. Massive tungsten rods, simple but deadly, flew through space at impossible speeds, invisible to alien sensors and impossible to dodge, and when they hit, it wasn't with fire or explosions, but with silence, tearing through hulls and leaving ships drifting gutted from the inside. The battle that followed was not clean or graceful like the Kalnari had expected, but brutal, sharp, and unpredictable, because human strategy was built around surviving worse odds and learning in real time. So, as the aliens adjusted tactics, Earth's captains changed theirs even faster, using decoys, sudden flanking maneuvers, and even gravity slingshots around moons to strike from strange angles. Captain Elias Rain of the ISV Thundervale flew his ship through a debris field so thick it shredded 3 of his stabilizers, but used the cover to blindside a Kalnari destroyer, launching 6 hypermissiles into its engine core and vanishing into black space before the explosion finished. Meanwhile, Earth's ground-based command centers passed control to quantum-linked AIs, who coordinated fire with machine precision, and within minutes, the Kalnari formation began to break, not because they were weak, but because they were confused, used to fighting enemies who feared them, not ones who struck with such calculated rage. Explosions dotted the void between Earth and Mars, chunks of alien steel spinning silently as human ships advanced, slow and heavy, like iron hammers falling through space. In the middle of the chaos, Lord Varantek tried to regain control, ordering his elite guard fleet to punch through Earth's lines and aim directly for the planet, hoping a decisive blow would change the tide. But humanity had kept one weapon, hidden, a class of ships never shown in diplomatic talks, the Titan class, 10 times heavier than anything the Kalnari had seen, powered by dark fusion engines and armed with gravity disruptors that could bend the paths of missiles and twist the space around incoming beams. When the first Titan, the ISV Warden, emerged from behind the moon, the battlefield seemed to pause. Even the Kalnari hesitated, staring at a ship that looked more like a moving fortress than a spacecraft, its hull black as night and covered in old battle scars from wars never recorded in public history. The Warden fired once, just once, and the nearest Kalnari battleship vanished, pulled apart by its own mass as gravity was torn out of balance. And in that moment, Lord Varantek understood something terrible. The humans had never been behind. In technology, they had simply chosen to develop weapons no other race would dare create, weapons that broke the rules of polite warfare, because humanity had never cared for what was acceptable, only for what worked. His ships continued to fight, brave and proud, but they were falling fast, and as one command vessel after another blinked out from the tactical display, he gave the order to retreat, not out of shame but out of survival, because this was no longer a skirmish or an occupation. It was a war, and Earth had just declared itself not a world to be conquered, but a power to be feared. Back aboard the Goliath, Admiral Callis watched the enemy fleet pull back toward deep space, her face unreadable, but her eyes cold with purpose, and as the debris of battle drifted silently past her viewport, she knew this was only the beginning. The Kalnari would return, and next time they would bring everything they had, but so would Earth, and now the galaxy had seen it too. Humanity was not the weak link in the stars. It was the spark, the echo of war rising in the darkness, and the universe would never laugh at them again. The wreck of the Kalnari dreadnought, Vashnal, drifted near the edge of Jupiter's orbit, torn open by Earth's railguns and left to freeze in the silent dark. But deep inside its shattered hull, one faint signal still pulsed, an emergency. Beacon, too weak for long-range detection, but just enough to catch the attention of the ISV Red Widow, a stealth-class human warship running recon on post-battle debris. Commander Mara Voss, known for her calm under pressure and zero failed missions, received the alert and studied the data with narrowed eyes. Knowing this wasn't routine salvage, Kalnari dreadnoughts were rarely abandoned and never left unguarded, unless something had gone terribly wrong or terribly right. And either way, the possibility of recovering alien tech, intel, or even a live officer made the mission too valuable to ignore. She ordered her team to prepare for boarding, activating cold entry protocols. No power spikes, no heat signatures, just a silent approach under the cloak of black ice stealth plating. The Red Widow drifted closer like a ghost, and once they were within 5 kilometers, 4 dropships launched, each carrying 6 Marines in black exo-armor built for zero-G combat and reinforced with hardened plates to withstand plasma burns and shrapnel. They moved without radio chatter, using only hand signals and HUD links, trained for operations just like this, and as the dropships locked onto the dreadnought's surface, magnetic clamps hissed and sealed the connection. The boarding teams cut through the outer hull with plasma torches, slicing into cold metal that groaned and popped as pressure shifted, and then they entered, one squad at a time, into dark, flickering corridors filled with smoke, broken lights, and drifting bodies of Kalnari crew, their suits frozen in unnatural positions, their faces locked in surprise and terror. It was clear they hadn't died in a clean fight. Something had happened inside the ship after the hull breach, something fast and chaotic, because the damage wasn't just from human weapons. It was from the inside, like an overload or sabotage. Commander Voss's team moved deeper, sweeping rooms, securing nodes, downloading fragments of the Dreadnought's central logs. But as they reached the command deck, the lead technician stopped cold, pointing at a flickering wall display still active, showing a looping feed from one of the lower decks where red lights pulsed and shadows moved unnaturally fast. Someone or something was still alive down there, and not just alive but mobile, active, avoiding security cams with precision that didn't match normal Kalnari movements. Voss ordered 2 Marines to set up a signal relay while she led the remaining team to the lower decks, following the path of destroyed bulkheads and shredded interior walls that looked less like battle damage and more like something had torn through them with claws. They found no resistance, only the aftermath of something wild and desperate, a Kalnari holding chamber broken from the inside, strange energy readings on the walls, and a trail of what looked like burn marks mixed with blood. But not Kalnari blood, something darker, thicker, human-like. The mystery deepened when they entered the secondary lab and discovered a sealed chamber still powered, locked behind alien encryption. But once hacked, it opened with a slow hiss and revealed a stasis pod containing a human prisoner, unconscious, scarred, and barely alive, marked with strange symbols burned into his skin. The crew stared in shock as Voss checked his vitals, confirming he was real. This wasn't a clone or a projection, but a live human, likely captured during a covert mission no one on Earth had ever reported missing. They evacuated the lab immediately, taking the man with them. But the moment they moved him out of the pod, the ship shuddered, not from structural collapse, but something else. Something waking up. Lights began flashing across the dreadnoughts. Halls, low growls echoed through the metal corridors, and security doors slammed down in sequence, trying to trap the team inside. Voss shouted for full retreat, and the Marines fought their way back to the entry point, opening fire as strange shapes darted in and out of view, creatures or constructs twisted by alien experiments, maybe even former crew turned into something else. One Marine was taken, pulled into the dark without a sound, and another was hit by a blast of energy that shorted his suit systems, forcing Voss to carry the prisoner herself, while her last 2 Marines covered their escape. They reached the dropships just as the hull began to tear again, something massive slamming against it from within, and as they pulled away, the Vashnal cracked in half behind them, collapsing into itself as internal systems finally failed. Back aboard the Red Widow, Voss stared at the unconscious man strapped to medbay equipment, watching his brainwaves spike as if he were dreaming or remembering something he shouldn't, and when he finally woke hours later, his first words chilled. The room. They were building something, using us, getting ready for war, but not with Earth, with something worse. Those few words changed everything, because if the Kalnari weren't the final threat, then Earth's battle had only just begun, and whatever had been trapped in that wreck wasn't gone, only delayed, waiting for the right time to return. The man they rescued from the Kalnari dreadnought gave his name as Kieran Holt, a former operative of Earth's Black Ops program who had vanished 5 years ago during a mission beyond the Kuiper Belt, listed as dead, and yet here he was, alive, broken, and carrying secrets buried deeper than anyone could imagine. Commander Mara Voss didn't trust him at first, not because he lied, but because his eyes told the truth too clearly. Eyes that had seen something not meant for any human to survive. And when he finally spoke again in the secure chamber aboard, the Red Widow, his voice was low and filled with the weight of knowing too much, saying the Kalnari hadn't just been studying humans, they had been dissecting them, learning how they think, how they adapt, how they build machines, not to copy, but to defend against something else, something older and far more dangerous than their empire. He spoke of a race called the Orcs, beings made of synthetic flesh and living data who once ruled the stars until the Kalnari and others drove them into deep space centuries ago. But now they were returning, and the Kalnari believed only one species in the galaxy might be wild enough, unpredictable enough to stop them: humanity. The truth stunned everyone in command, from Admiral Callus down to the newest cadet, because it meant the war they thought was about conquest had been a test, a violent trial to see if Earth was strong enough to stand on the front line of a much larger war. But the Kalnari had misjudged humanity's response, not realizing that humans didn't fight for tests or for approval. They fought to survive, and they fought to win. Now, with the dreadnought wreckage gone, and Holt's warnings echoing across every secure line in Earth's defense network, hidden labs on Mars and Luna began rechecking their research logs, their scans of the Irixel fragments found buried in alien archives, dismissed before as myths or outdated data. Only now they pulsed with new meaning. Pieces of metal with no clear origin, frequencies that hummed when no power was connected, and strange energy echoes that flickered like memories in machines. These were traces of something that defied physics, something that learned and evolved. Every time it was studied, Voss was summoned to the Goliath, bringing Holt with her under maximum guard, and as they approached the massive warship, now orbiting Earth like a silent sentinel, they saw that it had already begun refitting its weapon. Systems, not to fight the Kalnari again, but to prepare for something faster, smarter, and deadlier. In the war room, Holt met with Admiral Callus and laid out everything he knew: how the Irixel didn't use ships the way other races did, how they turned entire stars into engines, how they moved through the void by folding the fabric of space like paper, and how their weapons were not fired but born, grown inside data storms, and then unleashed with the precision of thought. They had no faces, only forms that shifted, and no diplomacy, only silence before they erased everything they saw as flawed, including empires like the Kalnari and possibly Earth itself. He warned that the Kalnari hadn't been trying to enslave humanity. They were trying to shape them into something stronger, faster, something that could survive contact with the Irixel. But they had gone too far, and in doing so, they had woken something dormant. Callus stood still for a long time after he finished speaking, then gave a single order: "Bring me every mind on Earth that has ever built something that shouldn't exist. We're done playing by the old rules." The next days moved fast. Scientists, once exiled for dangerous theories, were called back. Old AI systems sealed for ethical concerns were reactivated under strict watch, and plans once shelved for being too aggressive were dusted off and refined. Earth had finally learned the truth behind its war steel. Every ship, every railgun, every Titan-class platform wasn't just for defense anymore. They were seeds for something greater. A new breed of machines made not just to kill but to think, to adapt, and to survive the storm that was coming. Meanwhile, deep in uncharted space, Kalnari scouts sent final transmissions showing impossible things: ships that moved without engines, planets that blinked in and out of reality, and shadows, shaped like thoughts, hunting across the void. The Irixel were real, and they were moving, slow and patient, like a virus waiting for the right host. On Earth, as skies filled with new weapon platforms and secret messages passed between leaders of fractured nations now united by fear, the people began to sense that something larger was unfolding, something that stretched beyond borders or even worlds. And for the first time in history, humanity didn't feel small. They felt chosen, not by the Kalnari or by fate, but by the cold math of survival, because in the face of extinction, humans did what they had always done. They adapted, they resisted, and they prepared to burn the sky if that's what it took to stay free. Above the cold orbit of Neptune, where the stars seemed distant and space felt endless, Earth's final fleet waited in perfect silence, hidden under layers of electronic fog and dark energy shrouds, with weapons armed and engines cold, ready for what was coming. Not the Kalnari, not pirates or empire ships, but something far worse, something that made even the proud alien lords of old flee like cowards into the dark corners of the galaxy. The Irixal had arrived, not with a roar or a fleet of ships, but with the quiet death of systems, stars dimming for no reason, AI cores screaming in binary as unknown signals twisted their thoughts, and long-range probes blinking out without. Warning, each disappearance like a finger tapping the edge of humanity's will. Admiral Callis stood on the bridge of the ISV Goliath, her face hard as steel, watching the data come in while her officers tightened their grips on their consoles, knowing this was not just another battle. It was the final test of everything humanity had learned, stolen, built, and dared to become. They had named the plan Mirror Fire, a strategy not of overwhelming strength, but of chaos. Because Holt had said the Irixal feared unpredictability, feared what they could not simulate. And no species in the galaxy was harder to predict than humans. Across the fleet, experimental ships powered by folded reactors spun up silently. New Titan-class behemoths bristling with weapons still untested, while hidden among them were smaller vessels designed to bait and confuse. Holographic ships, false fleets, AI ghosts that broadcast human laughter, screams, or music across the stars to break enemy targeting. Then the Irixal came, not as ships, but as shapes in the void, like living shadows wrapped in light, moving faster than scanners could track, bending space with every step. And as they drew close, the void around Earth's fleet bent and cracked, like ice under pressure. Weapons fired, some beams, some sonic pulses, and others stranger still, but the Irixal didn't dodge or block. They adapted, folding around the attacks like water, only to reform and strike back with slivers of burning. Light that cut through metal as if it was smoke. One human ship vanished, then another. Their destruction quiet but terrifyingly clean, like they had never existed. But Callis gave no orders to retreat, only activated the second phase. Unleashing the quantum bombs, the chaos shells, the gravity. Spikes that tore open space itself to confuse and blind anything trying to map their movements. The battlefield turned into a storm of false signals and collapsing gravity wells, and for the first time, the Irixal hesitated, their strange movements, slowing as if they too were trying to understand the madness they had stepped into. That was when the Red Widow struck, now equipped with a stolen Kalnari drive, and Holt himself on board, guiding it toward the center of the Irixal formation where he believed their core signal node might be hidden. No one knew if it would work, but Holt had seen it once, deep in the Kalnari labs, and believed it was the one chance to fracture their collective thought, to make them feel fear, confusion, isolation. The Red Widow dove through a spiral of energy and fire, its hull peeling under pressure, its systems groaning. But it reached the point and deployed the last human trick, the Echo Pulse, a device built not to kill, but to reflect, to send back. Every signal, every thought, every image the Irixal sent forward, trapping them in a loop of their own minds. For a moment, the stars pulsed red, and the Irixal froze, their forms shaking, shifting, breaking apart as they stared into something they had never faced before. Themselves. Human ships fired everything they had in that instant, not aiming to destroy, but to strike when the enemy's mind cracked, and it worked. Some of the Irixal shattered like glass, others recoiled and vanished into folds of space, and one strange shape tried to speak, forming broken words from every language. It had heard, but the sound was drowned by the one thing humanity had chosen as its signal. Laughter, not mocking or cruel, but bold, wild, and real, the sound of species who had stood against gods and survived. Across the fleet, humans laughed, not out of joy but out of defiance, and the Irixal, who had once studied Earth signals and called them chaotic, now found themselves overwhelmed by it. They fled, not all, but enough, retreating into the dark, into the cracks between stars, broken for now but not gone, and the battlefield fell silent again. The cost was high. Many ships lost, brave lives ended, and Holt himself gone with the Red Widow, consumed in the pulse he helped deliver. But Earth had stood tall, not just as a world, but as a force. Back on Earth, as news spread, people didn't cheer wildly or cry. They stood in silence, eyes on the sky, knowing that the war was not over, only delayed, but that they had won something more important than victory, respect, from enemies and allies alike. Far beyond, in the ruins of Kalnari space, the survivors gathered again, not to mock humanity this time, but to listen. For in the distance they could still hear echoes of that strange, unsettling sound, human laughter burning through space, like a warning, a promise, and a challenge that the age of empires was over and the age of Earth had just begun.